and for that intro. So, just start off. Of all things that today's scriptures reading, especially the gospel that reminded me of, was a medieval English song called "Adam Lay Abounden." It has a lot of choral renditions. I don't know if anyone knows this. Perhaps. So, part of the song goes, nor had one apple taken been, then had never Our Lady been heaven's queen. Blessed be the time that apple taken was, therefore we may sing in Deo gratias, which, excuse my Latin, it's not pronounced well. So this song is kind of about this idea called felix culpa, another Latin term, meaning happy fault. It's kind of the idea that really anything can be redeemed by God, even humanity's greatest loss. And that greater good can eventually come from pain that we experience in our life. It's sort of the most ultimate silver lining perspective you could theoretically have. The reason why I thought about that song with today's reading is because Jesus is being very bluntly honest about the suffering and loss and upheaval that will be in our lives. It's kind of really distant from a lot of the toxic positivity I think we often try to give ourselves, like everything will be okay. However, in this gospel too, Jesus really insists that all this pain is not the end. And this is probably one of the harder gospel verses, I think, to kind of really just sit with and accept, because Jesus is guaranteeing that his believers will have to go through pain and betrayal. That's not something we want to hear often. I think most people, when they are reading the Bible, especially the Gospels, they're looking for peace in a very unpeaceful world. So it kind of hits a little hard. Though I think it's actually one of my favorites because, I chose to speak on it, so I ought to like it. But the reason why I actually really like this is because I think actually in its core, it's a message of hope, not of one of distress. And it's also a message of hope that's really honest with the nature of our world. And it kind of gets to the true core of one of the many cores that I think the gospel has, which is about having enduring faith. And it can be very hard to have enduring faith, I think, especially right now, because on top of all of our own personal challenges in life, in a lifetime, there's also now we have 24/7 access to see every type of suffering you could possibly theoretically think of. With media and internet, it's like we're given kind of this omniscient knowledge about everything that no one really has had before. And I don't think our brains really know what to do with it. So I think a lot of us just get really overwhelmed with all the injustices in the world that we're now aware of. And I think that can just feel like it's really too strong to defeat. Though I think not much has changed in the last 2,000 years. And we think about the people at the time in Judea in the time of Jesus. It was 2,000 years ago and about 6,600 miles away, according to Google Maps. So they were an oppressed people, desperate for healing and salvation. And I think it's really evident how difficult things were. Pretty much every town Jesus visited, there were crowds of people who had family members or themselves were blind, paralytic, lepers, outcasts, abandoned, and shunned. Any matter of distress. Though I think despite all of their distress, they were all very hopeful. And kind of my evidence for that, it might be a very small glimmer of hope, but the crowds reacted when they saw Jesus was that instead of just not even going to him, they actually went and tried to even grab even a piece of his cloak to see if they could be healed, because they had the faith that maybe this could work. And when I say hope, which is what I think they had, it's more than just a wish. It's more of an assurance or expectation that something will happen. And I think our hope in this case is that our pain isn't the end of the story, but it will be how we can better understand God. And that's kind of how I understand the line at the end of this gospel reading is, by your endurance, you will gain your souls. So to kind of go off of that, recently in my life, what I've been trying to do in kind of my daily life is try to see how all the different challenges in life and rhythms of life are reflected in the shape of the cross. And I know all of us kind of have challenges that kind of just feel barren and unmeaningful, just kind of aimless pain. And kind of the more drawn out they are, they kind of can weigh us down more. Though I think if we do consider our pain is reflected in how the pain Christ endured, we know that an even greater good can come out of it than we ever imagined. So personally, instead of like wallowing, what I do now is I ask myself, how is God's grace demonstrated through these trials? Or can something even more glorious be born from this? I think especially when we consider the like stations of the cross that are scattered the perimeter of the nave, um, we can just kind of consider the events that Christ went through during the Passion, especially. And preceding it, there, of course, was the agony of the garden, and then soon after, the scourging at the pillar, eventually ending up in the crucifixion. If the story ended there, all these events would probably seem like for naught and just kind of a waste and loss. And it's what I probably would imagine a lot of Christ's disciples and loved ones who are present kind of felt what was happening. Because here Christ is, who's healing people, is a promised Messiah to kind of really help save a very oppressed people, yet here he was degraded and tortured. But we know the story doesn't end there. And then not soon after, after all of the sorrowful events, there was the most glorious parts of the Passion. So then there was the resurrection, of course, and then soon after, 40 days after, there was the Pentecost, and then eventually the spread of the gospel to every corner of the world, even here we are in Independence, and now we're all together because of this. And then, so kind of my idea is that sorrow and loss are redeemable, and so often they can end in a greater glory than we could expect. I think a really good example of this is Mary Magdalene, for example. She was present at the foot of the cross where Christ was crucified. And I imagine for her at that moment, it felt very dismal. Like this was just all came to an end. However, not too soon after, she witnessed, I believe first, she witnessed the empty tomb. And then eventually she witnessed the resurrected Christ. So I would say this is going from like what would feel like the most cosmic level order of loss become the ultimate victory. And I think this is also really demonstrated in the readings from Isaiah today. God demonstrates his plan for redeeming creation, assuring that brokenness is not the end, it is just kind of a step on the way. Instead, everything will end in peace and restoration. And Isaiah doesn't say it's God's wish or desire, but more so that it will happen. And then while we wait for this new creation, I think Christ makes really clear that he just wants us to keep an enduring faith in him despite all the challenges in life. I'm personally convinced that that's what God cares about the most, is that we do have enduring faith in him despite every challenge in life, and that's what delights him the most. Even now, while we wait for this new creation, we can still participate in the hope of it by kind of doing our best to making it real now. So that can be through love and fellowship and communion with all people. So I hope you can see that what often feels like loss may not simply be loss, but can be part of a sorrowful mystery that becomes even more glorified. And to end, I would like to share something from St. Augustine. He said once, "Let us understand that God is a physician and that suffering is a medicine for salvation, not a punishment for damnation." Thank you.
Thank you, Wyatt.